Love is a very strong emotion, and contrasted by an equally as strong emotion, hate. They work in tandem, for without love, there is no hate, and without hate, there is not love. Two sides of the human experience that must be balanced. Unconditional love is naive to those who wish to harm you. How can you unconditionally love someone who murders your child, or your wife, or does something unthinkable? And when the innocent, the one you love, can be taken from you at a moment's notice, you must learn to know when to hate, and when to use it effectively. But uncontrolled hate is disastrous, and leads to evils that scar our history for ages. Maybe though, like the Christians say, don't hate the person, hate the sin. And in that same light, you can hate the crime, but forgive the person. But forgiveness comes after the attack has stopped, at least for some. But some people don't see forgiveness. Some people don't even see eye for an eye. They see eye for scorched earth. The intoxicating bloodlust of revenge fuels their existence, a circumstance propelled by a conviction that they have been wronged in a way that has turned them into a monster more dangerous than the one that they hunt. This is the story of John Liver-Eating Johnson. There are several fictionalized novels regarding John Liver-Eating Johnson, and even a 1972 Western film heavily inspired by the legend. But for this, I wanted to focus on what I found to be the most believable account of Johnson's life, and contrast it later with some of the funner, taller tales. That way we can get a fuller image of who the character of John Liver-Eating Johnson was. Keep in mind, neither of these accounts appear very credible. In fact, the more credible one ironically appears to be written by an 8th grader. But a 7th grade girl wrote The Outsiders, and I really like that book, so I'll cut him some slack. It seems to be a very on-point account of John's life, with little storytelling and a extra effect. So here is the medium to tall tale version. Born in 1824 in Little York, New Jersey as John Garrison, he was born to an alcoholic and abusive Scotch-Irish father who would have John performing hard labor from nearly the time he was able to walk. Having little empathy for his son, this type of child rearing would make John a cold and violent man like his father. Though, this would prove useful as John made his way into the vicious and merciless western frontier. At a young age, Johnson would leave home due to the constant abuse from his father and begin life as a schooner. For over a decade, John would spend his days on the ocean hunting whales. As John grew up, he grew into a large man for the time, standing somewhere between 5'11" and 6 feet tall, and weighing 280 pounds, most of which was pure muscle. John had grew to be a very intimidating man. During the Mexican-American War, John would join the United States Navy. John would not be a sailor for long, though, for his ill temper inherited from his father would see him assaulting a superior officer. John struck the lieutenant, causing him to lose consciousness. When he awoke, somewhat dazed, he wasn't quite sure what exactly had happened, but he had a pretty good idea. John would be punished by being denied shore leave for about a month. As soon as they allowed his feet to touch solid ground again, he left that Navy ship and he never came back. Fearing the wrath of the military, John Garrison would change his last name to Johnson, or possibly Johnston. I've seen it spelled both ways, but I'm gonna go with Johnson because it's easier to pronounce. He would flee west to capitalize on the gold rush in California, later mining and gathering gold all the way up to Colorado and through Wyoming, and eventually making his way into Montana. In Montana, he would participate in a multitude of trades: hunting, trapping, selling whiskey, bootlegging, and wolfing, which is a style of hunting where the hunter lays out poisoned meat for wolves to come and consume. Later, they would return and harvest the recently poisoned wolves. Wolfing was not universally praised during this time, especially amongst Native Americans. Leaving out arsenic-laced buffalo meat in the open led to many problems for the Native Americans, especially when done near their lands. The meat would attract stray dogs, which would lead to domesticated animals in their camp being attacked or killed. It was pretty common for Blackfoot Indians to attack wolfers on sight, and unfortunately for the wolfers, they hunted in small groups, usually less than 4, which made them easy to pick off by the roaming bands of Blackfoot. It is likely that many of John's trades were the reason he had such a confrontational relationship with some of the tribes. On the other hand, John also worked with many other tribes, selling his wares to them along trade routes. He would do on and off military work, joining the 1st Division 2nd Colorado Cavalry in 1963, where he enlisted as a scout in the United States Civil War. Despite being 39, he had lied to the enlister and said that he was 33. I assume to avoid any issues of him possibly being unfit to serve, or to further throw off the trail of his military past. Less than a week after enlisting, he abandoned his post in order to purchase some whiskey. Sometime later, he returned to find the cavalry was still there, and he was reassigned to the 2nd Regiment. Johnson would be wounded twice in 2 different battles in 1864, taking a shot to the leg in Westport, Missouri, and another one to the shoulder in Newtonia. After these wounds, he would be discharged in 1965, taking this opportunity to travel back to Montana and continue doing what he did best: kill Native Americans and drink whiskey. He definitely liked to drink whiskey. Meeting back up with an old acquaintance, a man by the name of J.X. Beidler, who shared John's love of whiskey and living the rough life, they began woodhawking in Sioux territory. Woodhawking is a very hard word to find a clear definition of, but the closest I found was from a book called Borderlands of the American and Canadian West. It says that woodhawking is the selling of buffalo bones. So I assume Beidler and Johnson were hunting the buffalo the Sioux relied on in order to survive the harsh winters in Montana. They were frequently ambushed by Sioux warriors, and eventually the two men decided it was too dangerous and they would part ways. Johnson would return to what he honestly does best: hunting and trapping. Eventually, I suppose, Johnson got another hair up his ass and decided that mountain manning isn't dangerous enough in a state that sees negative 30-degree temperatures on the regular, and rekindled his partnership with Beidler. They continued woodhawking in Sioux territory. Johnson wanted to make his presence known as a man that's not to be toyed with, but who also has morbid toys and trinkets to sell. Johnson would often set up shop next to the river where steamboats would bring in loads of naive tourists. His makeshift stand would be decorated with Native American skulls on stakes, and he would sell other body parts of slain Sioux warriors to the travelers that he had collected during his woodhawking with Beidler. Despite his notorious nickname, Liver-Eating Johnson, there is little evidence that he actually ever consumed a human liver. At some point during his time in Sioux-controlled Montana, around 1868, Johnson and 15 other woodcutters would be ambushed by Sioux warriors. During the battle, Johnson would impale a Sioux with his knife, and as he retrieved his blade from the man's flesh, a small piece of liver was stuck to the tip. Johnson raised his blade in glory and gestured to his comrades, "Anyone want a chaw?" Like clockwork, Johnson would return to hunting and trapping, but this time the Sioux started stealing his traps as well as his pelts that he had retrieved. So Johnson, getting fed up with his hard work going to the Sioux, left out traps for them. One trap would be a small tent, crafted in such a way that it appeared to be abandoned in a hurry, as if someone had been scared off. He would leave a freshly cooked piece of meat inside the tent that had been laced with poison, so that any natives who found the tainted meat would suffer dire consequences. He also was witty enough to dig a tunnel underneath his cabin, which led to the outer area of the property, possibly for quick escapes, but was also used to his advantage. When he realized one day that a Sioux ambush was waiting for him inside his cabin, he climbed into the tunnel and managed to position himself below the waiting Sioux warriors. He would shoot up through the floorboards, striking one of them and scaring the rest off. Beidler and John would join up once again for another venture, this time convoying bootlegged whiskey through the very dangerous Blackfoot-controlled trade routes referred to as the Whoop-Up Trail. Setting out in 1868, Johnson and Beidler would successfully sell whiskey and occasionally other goods to members of the Blackfoot tribe until 1873 with little to no confrontations. As John approached his 50s, he came to the conclusion that it was time to start settling into a safer lifestyle. After another stint of hunting and trapping and occasionally driving a stagecoach, Johnson would become a lawman in the town of Colson, Montana, which later would be known as the city of Billings, Montana. After a brief retirement from law, Johnson would become sheriff of Colson, but he would be forced to retire due to difficulties with his shoulder injury he received during the Civil War. On January 21st of the year 1900, 21 days into the turn of the century, Johnson would die in a veteran's hospital in Los Angeles, California, at the age of 76. John was buried in California, but later his body was relocated to Cody, Wyoming after a small campaign allegedly led by a group of 25 7th graders petitioned to have it brought to an area that John particularly liked. He spent much of his time in that region that is now Cody, and his favorite mountain range would be the Beartooth, which ran between Cody and his personal favorite place to hang his hat, the Pollard in Red Lodge, Montana. And that basically wraps up the lesser tall tale version of John's life, though it's still quite adventurous. But now I want to talk to you about the more exciting tales, the ones that are a little less believable, but way more fun. For the most part, the tall tale version of Johnson remains mostly the same up until after his leave from the Navy after striking a superior. From here, it is said that Johnson would go to meet his wife, who is allegedly a member of the Flathead Indian tribe. He would take the love of his life into the mountains where he would build them a log cabin by hand. It is here where Johnson appeared to have changed his ways, and he desired a simple life in the calm of the wilderness with the one that he loved. Unfortunately, fate would be cruel, and during one of Johnson's hunting and trapping expeditions, members of the Crow tribe would descend upon Johnson's cabin and his unsuspecting wife. They would murder her in cold blood and burn the cabin that John had built to the ground, leaving nothing but a smoldering pile of destroyed dreams. Johnson would return to find what happened, and filled with the pain of losing his love, he vowed a vendetta against the Crow tribe. He made it his destiny to slaughter every crow he could get his hands on, and not only that, Johnson would remove the liver of every crow killed and consume it, knowing that the Crow religion values the liver as a sacred organ and sees it as necessary to pass on into the afterlife. So not only would he take this life away from them, he would banish them from entering the second life, dooming them to purgatory. Needless to say, this guy was pissed, and Johnson didn't disappoint. Slaughtering an estimated 300 Crow tribesmen, his reputation grew amongst the natives. Mere mention of his name was known to cause distress amongst the Crow, creating a Voldemort-like energy and mystery around his character. During his revenge campaign, members of the Blackfoot tribe would manage to capture John. They intended to sell the ravenous Indian slayer to the Crow tribe, for a handsome price of course. They removed all but John's pants and shoes and tied him in binds. They walked him back to a tent where they would leave him under the supervision of one of the younger, less experienced tribesmen. Johnson was able to escape his bindings and would overpower the Blackfoot. He would then scalp the man, and before retreating into the woods, he would saw off one of the natives' legs to use as nourishment during his escape into the harsh mountains of Montana. After 25 years and over 300 Crow tribe livers delivered to John's mouth, he eventually made his peace with the tribe and ended his bloody crusade. I could say he probably thought at this point that the scoreboard spoke for itself, and the Crow were probably just relieved to be done with the whole thing. I guess the couple that were left. From there, the fantasy somewhat ends, and the story blends back into the more likely tale of John, continuing with his joining of the cavalry in Colorado. All of the tales are extremely entertaining to read through, and nearly everything I read about the Western frontier is fascinating. It's almost like a Lord of the Rings novel, with varying different cultures and factions and people warring over the same resources and living amongst each other in uneasy and sometimes violent relationships. One of the things I found really interesting when I was reading about the city of Billings, which was named Colson when John was sheriff, that it was referred to by a different name by the natives. A word I can't be asked to attempt to pronounce, but it literally just translated to where they cut wood, because they had a sawmill in the town. I just imagine the Indians like some grumpy neighbors pissed about the sawmill running at all hours of the night. Hey, shut that off! I'm trying to sleep! How much of this do I think is true? Well, it's really hard to say. The first telling of John's story seems much more grounded and something I can believe, but there are several details I have questions about, and I also left out some of the details that I found very unlikely to be true, despite being presented as such. The second story is pretty obvious. It's a lot of legend, rumors, and folklore surrounding his character. I doubt a mountain man who peddles whiskey, was a wolfer, and spent most of his time in a very dangerous native-controlled territory, frequently battling ambush attacks, would have the time to maintain a home life as a husband. So the story involving him having a wife kind of seems unlikely to me. Either way, it's just a really fun piece of American folklore that's based on a little bit of history and probably a lot of narrative telling and liberal exaggerations for the sake of a fun story. Thank you guys for watching.